the fourth industrial revolution. It's quite positive and it's having a positive impact on the global balance of forces. But then, the other positive thing that is actually listed in the document, it's these regional blocs that are now formed as a political and economic countermeasure to the status quo. Remember, we have G7, we have G20, and smaller countries are pushed to the periphery, to these mainstream developments. So, but we have a reorganization now that is quite positive for developing countries. There in the Gulf, you have what is now, regional blocs there. But also we have BRICS. It's a very positive thing. But then on the negative side is that we had an outbreak of COVID sometime 2 years ago. That led to many deaths. People died. But also we experienced an economic meltdown because of COVID. Those things are negative. But what we also note is that on the political spectrum, especially in Europe, many countries are moving right. That's now center-right. But some are even bold enough to move far-right. Recently, we had an election in France where the political party of Marine Le Pen openly contested on the ticket of narrow nationalism. They contested on the ticket of, and they were forced to be reckoned with. They really challenged the status quo in France. What that means is that forces that are lenient to our own agenda are under serious strain because we have the rise of narrow nationalism and chauvinism. That actually puts lots of pressure on progressive forces globally. And there's a reason for that, we are saying. And the main reason for this retreat globally of progressive forces is because there's a lack of legitimacy amongst the political and economic elite. People see the leadership that they are no longer able to deal with matters, for instance, of inequality in the world. They are unable to deal with issues of migration. Remember when Trump was elected, he said that he's going to build a big wall between the USA and Mexico. Populist, and people voted for him on that ticket of populism. We are unable to deal with issues of climate change. And as a result, anyone who comes and says that I'll be able to do that, people vote and follow that person. In our own country, the issue of land expropriation is used in such a way that because people see us, we are unable to deal with this matter. And here comes Malema, and he boldly speaks about land expropriation without compensation. In a very populist way, people follow him. And you can see in the increase of the votes of the EFF that this message resonates. It resonates with the masses on the ground. But we are making bold that we can do better globally. The progressive global forces can do better. But we are under serious strain. For instance, in India, remember how the Indian Congress was ousted? It was ousted on the ticket that the Indian Congress is corrupt. And as a result, that message was repeated repeatedly, and we can also see the same thing is said about the ANC, until the Indian Congress was actually ousted. In Brazil at one point, a progressive force in BRICS, we had President Rousseff there. She won the election. But the campaign that happened after the elections, where people actually lobbied against him, against her, to a point where she was ousted as the president of Brazil. In Russia, we can see the eastward expansion of NATO and the military aggression that is contemplated against Russia, only to find out that Russia is ready, militarily disposed to counter the offensive against it. But then, comrades, we are China. The superpower, which is America, owes China much. So they don't want to go into a war with China. But then in our own country, comrades, South Africa, we are saying that there's a postulation that after 2 decades, which means after 20 years, liberation movement stall. We are saying as the organization, that's not scientific. It's not scientific that after 2 decades we stall. But what we need to do, to the extent that we are able now to understand the subjective weaknesses that the organization experiences, we'll still be able to be at the helm of fighting for a national democratic society. That's what we are saying. But then in Africa, what the document seeks to do that's in front of you, it wants to deepen your understanding basically about the type of Africa that we want. We want a peaceful Africa, we want a developmental Africa, we want a prosperous Africa. That's what the document is basically saying. And it is saying that the Africa Rise narrative will succeed only if leaders of the continent work together for the integration of the continent. Then that will basically succeed. When it comes to South Africa, we are saying that the subjective weaknesses that we highlighted earlier, if we address those subjective weaknesses, we'll be able to achieve the national democratic society that we aspire to achieve. But then the question is, how do we arrive at this national democratic society? The tool that the chairperson spoke about earlier, it's like when you want to go to town. We are living most in the periphery. When you want to go to town, you use a taxi or even your car as an instrument to reach town. Now in our situation, in order to achieve this national democratic society, the instrument that we are using